As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
Weight loss as a reason for exercising or initiating any type of behavior that we hope to sustain long term inherently means that we're defective, that we're not good the way we are. And it turns whatever behavior we're trying to start with weight loss as our primary goal or why, it turns it into a chore. And so I'm sure everyone understands that as soon as you turn a behavior into a chore, you engage a rebellion system, reactance theory, if you will. And so from the get-go, before you start, you are creating this tension and angst and resentment of the very thing that you think you want.
That was Michelle Segar on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, everyone. This is Debbie, and I'm here with Jill today. We're introducing an episode I did with Michelle Segar, who is an expert on sustainable exercise and sustainable health behavior. She really is looking at trying to help people maintain exercise and healthy behaviors for a lifespan, not just a really hardcore blitz and then you fizzle out in, a few workouts or in a few days or a few weeks, but really how can we keep some of these types of behaviors going for life, for the long term. And Jill, I would love to hear your thoughts about the conversation, because I know that this is something that you have been really putting into practice in your own life in terms of making exercise more sustainable for yourself.
Yeah, well, I will say I think I've had a very complicated history and relationship with exercise. One of the things Michelle says that I think we all hear is for exercise to be sustainable, it matters that you like what you're doing. And she acknowledged that sometimes you'll talk to people who say, I don't like any kind of exercise. And I was one of those people. And part of that was, she also acknowledges that, which I really appreciated, that sometimes living in a larger body, it can be really hard to enjoy exercise. And that was definitely my experience for a long time. But the other thing is, I just hadn't tried a lot of things yet. I was doing the things that I knew to do, like getting on a treadmill, and I more recently have discovered Pilates. I discovered yoga. I've hiking. Now that I'm in New England, I'm downhill skiing. I never set foot in a gym, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and I also want to acknowledge that a lot of those things take resources, and not everyone has the resources, right? Like Pilates is very expensive. And so, she was talking about how it's important to find things that you like, that you enjoy, and also acknowledging that that can be a challenge. But that has been huge for me. I think the other things that really resonated with me in this episode are like the tendency to get really rule governed, like the shoulds. And I know what would happen for me is I would get a lot of these thoughts and feelings. Like sometimes if I wasn't on my treadmill a certain number of times a week for a certain number of minutes, running at a certain speed, it like didn't count. Right.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
had to really get flexible. And so sometimes, including this morning, I got on my treadmill in my pajamas, like just to go for a stroll because I just wasn't feeling motivated to like go through the rigmarole of getting on all my exercise clothes and my sneakers. And in that moment, it was like, what is it that is my goal here? I just want to move my body. I just want to get my heart rate up a little bit and I want to get moving. And moving is better than not moving. It doesn't have to be perfect. She talks about that perfection frame or fixed frame and how important it is to be a little bit more flexible. Now, that said, I've also noticed for me that I have to schedule it into my calendar or it won't get done. I think as busy people who always have people asking us to do more and right, that like it's way too easy to all of a sudden look at your calendar and be completely blocked off for the whole entire week. So I schedule out my exercise a month in advance and I don't schedule over it unless I really have to. And that probably happens maybe like 10% of the time. But I even schedule a little extra knowing that that's likely going to happen. So what about you, Debbie? What was it that sort of landed for you?
First of all, I mean, I just want to piggyback on what you're saying a little bit because it's so interesting. I could never schedule exercise a month in advance. I mean, I might schedule a walk with a friend or something, but just people are different, right? And
right.
As you're talking about that, and I know this about you because a lot of times we'll be scheduling a meeting and you have Pilates on a certain day or something like that. I just don't operate like that. And I think for me, one of the big things that she helped me see is ways of just getting those little bits of exercise into your day. Sometimes you can be creative. So I was talking to someone on the phone and it occurred to me, it's nice outside. I'm going to go for a walk while I'm talking to this person. And little things like that actually do make a difference. She talks about counting everything, that's movement.
Yes.
And
yeah, we've been taking our dog for walks more frequently as the weather's been getting nice. And I have that conversation with myself. Like, this counts, right?
Exactly.
You're moving your body. This counts. Yeah.
There was one day, this is a kind of an extreme example, but I really didn't have a chance to do any kind of movement all day. And I noticed at the end of the day, my body just felt kind of stiff and tense from stress. And it was almost time to go to bed. And so I just did a little bit of stretching. Yeah. And it was not much, but it just felt really good to take a moment to do that. And I think I might not have even thought of that previously.
And that's connecting it with that or that why, right? That like,
yes,
she says that when if you're like, oh, I need to do it to be healthy, like losing your health feels so far down the road. There's no immediate kind of consequence. So it's not actually very motivating. And, she was saying the main reasons for exercise that people give are losing weight and health. And neither of those are very good motivations for long-term sustainability, right?
Yeah.
And, what you're pointing to is my body feels uncomfortable. And when I stretch, my body feels better immediately and being able to connect that more. And, for me, it's funny. Health has become a good motivator for me because it no longer feels far away. Like for me, in an immediate sense, I am thinking, I don't want to be an old lady. I want to be a young old lady. And when I'm sick or I'm traveling, if I ever have to take a couple days off, I feel stiff and terrible and uncomfortable. So it's become more immediate so that has been a motivator to make sure that I'm keeping all the joints lubricated, right?
Yeah, I immediately feel, you do the kind of stretches that feel good to you. A lot of times it's my neck. So just stretching my neck and kind of moving helps a little bit. It's, that alone is not a big deal, but it does help you to tune into that, right? Oh, this feels better in my body, and to tune into some of these things you're saying about what's enjoyable to you. Because I'm never going to get up at 5 a.m. and go for a run. There have been times in my life when I would do stuff like that. It's just too punishing to me. But then
Right,
there are other
exactly.
things that actually feel pretty good to me. And
Yeah.
so it's
right. And if it
nice
feels punishing, you're not going to keep doing it.
Exactly. Well, this episode, I think, will inspire you and will help you be a little bit more creative about getting movement into your life. And so I hope you enjoy. Michelle Segar is an award-winning NIH-funded researcher at the University of Michigan who studies how to help people adopt exercise and other self-care behaviors in ways that can be sustained in the real world. Michelle has a PhD in psychology, a master's degree in health, behavior, and health education, a master's degree in kinesiology, and fellowships in translational research and healthcare policy from the University of Michigan. Today, we're here to talk about her 2 books. The first is No Sweat, How the Simple Science of Motivation Can Bring You a Lifetime of Fitness. And her newer book is The Joy Choice, How to Finally Achieve Lasting Changes in Eating and Exercise, which was named one of the best health books experts read in 2022 by the Washington Post. Welcome, Michelle. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really excited about the conversation because I've read both of your books to get ready for today's conversation. And I honestly think I will never look at exercise and health behavior change in exactly the same way again, both for myself personally with my own attempts to stay active and take care of my own health and also the work I do with my clients. So I hope our listeners feel the same way.
Thank you. I hope so too. And hopefully we'll get into some really interesting conversations.
We will. And I'll share some examples even of what I've noticed as I put this into play in my own life as we have the conversation, because I'm already seeing an impact. And so listeners can stay tuned to hear a little bit more about that as the conversation unfolds. So to set the stage for listeners, I want to start with a 2-part question. And the first part is probably pretty straightforward. What are the main reasons people give for wanting to engage in exercise and health behaviors? If you just ask them, why do you want to exercise? What do people usually say?
Well, I'll say that there's one that people say 90% of the time, and then there's another one that people say about 10% of the time. And I bet you can guess what the 90% of the time is. What do you think it is?
Well, I know from reading your books, and I probably would have guessed before reading your books, it's weight loss.
Yes. Yeah.
And
then better health in some way, shape, or form, avoiding a disease, improving our health now, placating our clinicians, and there are other reasons, but those are the 2 big ones.
Okay. So weight loss and health, long-term health.
Yes.
And I mean, I think many of us want those things and care about those things, but they aren't necessarily helpful when it comes to what you're writing about here, which is really lifelong, sustainable exercise patterns, really making this part of our regular lives. Could you talk a little bit about why these reasons kind of get us into some trouble here?
Yes. And, I didn't start my career to undermine these reasons for exercising, to get them out of the way. My research is what taught me that these were really non-optimal reasons. I mean, the weight loss reason for exercise is pretty clear, and there's a few different reasons. The first one that I focus on a lot in the book is that weight loss as a reason for exercising or initiating any type of behavior that we hope to sustain long term inherently means that we're defective, that we're not good the way we are. And it turns whatever behavior we're trying to start with weight loss as our primary goal or why, it turns it into a chore. And so I know you have a lot of mental health professionals who listen to this. And so I'm sure everyone understands that as soon as you turn a behavior into a chore, you engage a rebellion system, reactance theory, if you will. And so from the get-go, before you start, you are creating this tension and angst and resentment of the very thing that you think you want. And the second really important reason is that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I would say this changed about 15 years ago, people understood, scientists thought that when you wanted to lose weight, we both needed to exercise and change our eating, and that those were basically equally important as contributors to the weight loss goal. But through research across many different disciplines, we now understand, and I'm going to make up a stat, but the point is correct. The stat might be incorrect.
Okay. Yeah.
Our weight is determined by, 75 to 85% of what we eat, and the other part, our activity level. So if you're using exercise to try to lose weight, you're not going to see a lot of benefits. And I want to go a little further psychologically with why weight loss is a harmful reason to sustain a physically active life. And all of my work is only about sustainability. That's all I care about. That's what I've been studying for 30 years. So any comment I say is not about making a change. It's about how do you sustain it for the rest of your life. The other reason is that I think in today's world, and even 30 years ago when I started coaching people in these processes, we're all busy people. And this was before social media kicked in, right? And this is before the pace of life, went into a supersonic speed. If you want to sustain a behavior for the rest of your life, you have to learn about that behavior. You have to learn about how does it fit into your life? What gets in the way? How can you overcome those things? And if you're trying to change two behaviors at once, exercise, if you're trying to lose weight and you want to both exercise and change your eating, well, that would be a superhuman cognitive lift that most of us just don't have the bandwidth and the wherewithal and the energy level to do. So, if you want to lose weight, the answer is clear. Focus on your eating and changing that. And there's ways to do that psychologically in strategic ways. So I don't want to get into that right now. But focus on one behavior at a time if you want to sustain it.
Well, and I think that one thing that I've seen in my work as a psychologist who works with health behavior change sometimes and really has this behavioral orientation to my work is that sometimes people get discouraged when they really care about weight loss because they'll say, oh, I started exercising. I've been exercising 5 days a week. Nothing has changed. I mean, actually, sometimes people gain weight. Sometimes nothing changes. So it's like, then they're like, well, what's the point of this? And they get demotivated, right? They're looking for, we talk a lot about process versus outcome. And I think when you fixate on that number on the scale, first of all, there's so much tied to weight stigma and shame and that whole thing that you mentioned.
But
there's also this sense of, well, why bother?
That's right.
I've been working so hard.
Well, and not only why bother, well, it's what I call health and weight are what I deem the wrong whys for exercise. And it's because of what it turns it into. And it starts a behavioral process that we are not going to get great feedback. And that's why weight loss, especially weight loss, but even health is the wrong why. And when I started my career in this topic in 1994, I believed as a practitioner and a scientist that better health was a great reason to exercise. I thought, what's more important than our physical health? We have nothing if we don't have our physical health. That should be, the best intrinsic reason for exercise, until my data slapped me in the face and suggested to me that health as a reason for exercise was almost as detrimental as weight loss. And, so again, research teaches us what we need to know. And I'm going to stop there because I have a feeling we can circle back to this later.
We can. Yeah. But I think your point is really well taken here, which is that as a motivator in the moment, it isn't necessarily effective, and you have good research that you cite in your books to about why that is the case. What do you think? So those are the wrong whys. So what are the right whys? What would be some better reasons that would be more effective to help us get up and get moving?
Sure. So, I also want to say, before I say what the right whys are, science suggests that our reasons for initiating any behavior, so we can step out of health behaviors and we can go into education, we can go into work. It doesn't really matter what the behavior is. Our reasons for doing a behavior create the whole frame through which we see a behavior, how we experience doing it, and ultimately whether or not we decide to do it day in and day out. So our whys are absolutely fundamental, and they determine from the get-go they have a domino effect and will determine whether we stick with it or not for the most part. Now, and I'm sorry, I have to give one more caveat.
No, please. This is great.
I'm going to be talking about things as if, they are truisms. And it's important to point out that nothing is true for everyone, but some things are true for most. So if you think about the bell curve for those, who went to graduate school or had statistics, it's like most people fall under the bell curve. And then you've got phenomena and other experiences on the edges. So what I'm proposing isn't going to be true for everyone. And you might say, that isn't true for me. And I know one person who I work with that's not true with, or my spouse it's not true for. So nothing is true for everyone. But when it comes to human nature, I think the science, and I've come to believe that some things are true for most. Like most of us are going to be more motivated by an immediate reward, something that's going to gratify us immediately, than something we have to wait months and years and decades for. So that's a truism, I think. Again, there are some people who have incredible discipline and are just going to be super motivated by the long term. But if you've lived for decades in the human body, you know that that's not true for most people. And that's also why we have so many problems in society, is because most people are motivated by immediate gratification. Here's the unfortunate thing. So one thing I want to say is people who tend to be very ambitious, I think this is a personality trait. Like my husband is like that, but he's like that in all areas of his life. So I believe that there is and again, I don't have data to back this up. I mean, we do know that, conscientious people tend to do certain things and certain people have more self-control than others. And not that you can't change skills and traits and stuff like that, but to some extent, there are some embedded inclinations in each of us. The really unfortunate thing is that society at large, the media especially, feature the people who succeed in this approach. These are the role models who we should all be like because they're succeeding at this model. And what happens is that we think, because we're told this is the model we should be following, these are the whys we should be exercising for, these are the ways we should be exercising, we believe, by no fault of our own, it's the way simply we've been indoctrinated in society to approach healthy living, health behavior change, that if we can't succeed in that model, that there's something wrong with us, that we don't have enough self-control, that we're not athletic enough, that we simply can't do it. But in fact, the fatal flaw in that story is that society is featuring the people on the edges of the bell curve, the people who've succeeded in a model that does not align with human nature. So that's a lot of context for the right whys, right?
No, but that's really helpful if people blame themselves and get into that whole cycle, which is a lot of people. And so I'm really glad you made that caveat.
And that is in my coaching model for sustainable lifestyle change, that is where I start. Yeah. Because you need people to externalize failure, or that will just sit there and stay there. So, okay. So what are the right whys? Well, it turns out that if you exercise for reasons related to your immediate sense of well-being, your immediate quality of life, people are more motivated by immediate gratification than distal rewards they have to wait for in the future. So what are those whys? It's having more energy and having a lifted mood, and research in epidemiology and also mental health and depression. I mean, we know that exercise in some studies suggests that, I mean, I'm sure it depends on the severity of mental health illness, that exercise is as effective as certain medications in certain people. I'm sure, again, the caveat is I'm sure that's not true. That's your field. That's not my field.
Yeah, but I think it's true. I mean, even, I'm a therapist, and I think a lot of people, their well-being is higher if they exercise more so than therapy. So, I mean, I'm not saying that's for everyone.
Yes.
But yeah.
Yes. And so consider the idea that if you are feeling down, you just were having a bad day, and you knew that going outside, for example, and taking a 7-minute walk could elevate your state of being, by a point or two on a scale of 1 to 7. Again, people don't think like that, but in a noticeable way. Why wouldn't you do it? So, and now, in general, this has changed, especially since COVID. And I can tell you that the fitness industry is very interested in shifting the meaning of exercise in this new direction. But it's a tough ship to turn. People have not been socialized to think about physical activity as a way to feel better about themselves. In fact, they think about it as a way to punish themselves. And it's a chore. So it's really this alternative 180 degrees flip in the meaning of exercise. No longer is it to achieve something in the future that it actually is never going to deliver to you, most likely. It is to help you feel your best right now so that you can have that much more energy and enthusiasm for the projects and the people that you care most about.
Well, I think it really resonates for me personally, and I'll just talk about myself as an example. I'll get into some details about some of this later when we talk a little. You have some great strategies that I found really helpful, but I think this is actually the main piece that really resonates because I'm pretty versed at looking at your long-term values and making decisions in the moment based on what matters to me and that kind of thing. But I think that this piece about tuning into the immediate reinforcement, the positive associations, first of all, as you're saying, it is more motivating. For myself, I just feel better in my body when I've had some type of movement, even like you said, something brief, like a little stretching or going for a walk or more of a workout. And I know this really well from experience. I did some walks and some exercise last week. And then yesterday I had a really busy, stressful day and I didn't do any. And I really noticed, I've been really paying attention to it. I just noticed how much tension I felt and I just didn't feel that good in my body. And so I'm really trying to just pay attention to that, I think. I mean, I've known that all along, of course, but I think that it helps me to just really tune into that. And when I'm stressed, of course, the thing I really need and want to do is to exercise, but I feel like it gets really easily backburnered.
Yes. And one of the reasons it gets backburnered isn't just because, well, why is this a priority compared to these other things? But people's standards and criterion for what they should be doing are so high. Again, here's our role models. Here's what they're doing every day. Yeah. This is what we're supposed to do. When it's too big, it's very easy to keep it on the back burner because it just doesn't fit. I want to say another thing. So I told you about the study where we looked at which reasons and goals were associated with the most physical activity. Other research that I haven't done, but that's out there, is that, and this is very counterintuitive. People say, gosh, I just don't know why I don't do it more because, well, I hate doing it, but I feel so much better when it's done. And that is also a pretty normal phenomenon because being physically active, it does so much for how we feel. But here's the problem with that model. Research, I don't even want to say suggests, as we are supposed to as scientists, because at this point it's pretty unequivocal that how how we feel while during movement is going to predict our future decisions to exercise, or, predicts whether people exercise, not afterwards. So the model of, if I could just get to the gym that I hate to go to and push through it, I would feel better, makes sense. And yes, almost everyone feels better unless they hurt themselves, but it's during movement. Mm-hmm. So it's not to say that you can't notice that your stress level and mood is better right after you're done walking. But if whatever you're doing in the moment, you feel a disdain toward doing, you're not going to keep it up. So we really have to care very much about how we feel while we're moving.
Yeah, we will talk about that more later when we get into some strategies. I'll also say that another area where I think you turned my thinking on its head a little bit is around habit formation. And of course, tiny habits is really big these days. And I think a lot about that, how do you get into a behavioral pattern and start a new habit? But I think you make a really important point I believe it's in the Joy Choice, about how sometimes we really think, okay, I'm going to start this habit, hoping that it will eventually become easy and automatic, like, oh, I'm in the habit of getting up at 5 a.m. and going for a run, and now it's so easy for me. Why is it not so simple when it comes to exercise as a habit compared to something like flossing your teeth?
Sure. So first, let me say, before I explain why, that I am not a habit researcher, but I read the habit literature, and I've certainly spoken to habit researchers because it's very important. But the reality is that there are some habit researchers who have taken the lead on critiquing the value of habit formation for complex behaviors like exercise. And let's just make sure we define for the listeners what we're talking about. The word habit is used very differently and loosely in society. So sometimes it just means doing something routinely. But what you and I are talking about right now is the promise of effortless automatic decisions, which sounds so good in theory.
Right?
And I want to, yes, wouldn't it be lovely? And the reality is that we live a lot of our life on automatic habit, so on autopilot. So it's not to say that habits are bad. Habits are great if they can work for the things we're trying to do. So one of the things that's happened is that the habit literature in general is built on animal models. It's built also on, as much of psychological research it's built using students who live lives that are pretty different than people who are not students, right? So while they may have a lot going on, it's different than having children and a full-time job and maybe aging parents and all these other things. So the model, I think, has been overgeneralized for its value. So automatic habits are the things we do without having to think. Okay, it's like you walk in the door and you put your keys down in a very specific place. You don't think, I have to put my keys down in a specific place. Or it's flossing. Like for me, the way it works for flossing, I have an automatic flossing habit, which I value. And I had to learn it in my 20s. I had to actually consciously make it work. Here's what happens for me. The first thing I do while flossing, brushing teeth, pairing, I floss my teeth. And then as soon as I'm done, I automatically reach for my toothbrush. There's no thinking involved. That is an example of a simple behavior with the popular kind of user-friendly way of talking about habit formation. How does it work? Well, you have a cue. For me, my cue is I'm done flossing. Then you have a behavior that you're trying to form a habit for, brushing. That would be the behavior step 2. Step 3 is the reward. Well, the reward is, feeling a sense of satisfaction, knowing I'm taking good care of my mouth, maybe the feeling of freshness. And the more we do those 3 steps, the more our brain learns to do it and it becomes automated. But in order for a habit to form, your brain has to learn this process in an uninterrupted way. If every time you do it, it gets interrupted, your brain isn't going to learn that automated process. Let's think about this. I'm in the bathroom. My dog isn't in there with me. My kids, for the most part, aren't pulling on my legs. I'm not trying to stream a Netflix show. Maybe some people do, but I'm focused alone with the door closed. Nothing much is going to interrupt it. But let me walk outside of my bathroom door into the rest of my life. And, there can be mayhem and things I didn't anticipate. And once we leave the simplicity of a simple behavior and we enter our crazy life, and then we try to form a habit with a behavior like exercise that isn't one step. It's not putting the floss down and picking up. You might have to plan it into your day. You might have to get somewhere. You might have to change your clothes. You might have to negotiate an unexpected email. That is a completely different situation. So the narrative around creating habits is lovely, but when you look at the assumptions that underlie successful habit formation within the realities of the life that most people live, again, not the people up here who seem to do it right perfectly every time or most times, but us, regular folks who may not have wills of steel, who might be managing our kids' lives and our family schedules and our pets and on top of a 9-to-5 job. That's a lot of unexpected that can, get thrown and interrupt that. So you can tell I'm pretty passionate about this topic, and I'm passionate about it because I really care about helping people change their behavior in ways that they're going to succeed at. And I think habit formation is misguiding most people when it comes to changing their lifestyle behaviors.
Yes. I'm so glad you acknowledge this. I could really relate to it as I have a job, a busy job. I have 2 kids. I have, a house and a dog and all the chaos, as you say in the book, chaos level high in my life. And I think that one of the things that you write about is permission to prioritize self-care, and how, if you're going to ask me, do you care about taking care of yourself? I would say, sure. Yes, of course. That's important to me. I want to take care of myself and do these things to recharge me and rejuvenate me and so on and so forth. And yet it often feels like it gets really down low on the list, especially when I'm busy and stressed. And you write really well about that sort of caretaking, whether it's caretaking of like a child or a pet or a person that needs your help, or even more generally, a job. Like you have all this work pressure and that kind of thing. And so it is sometimes hard, I think, to make room for yourself in that. So what advice do you have for someone like me who can really relate to that part of your work?
Yeah, well, it's a tough one. And I can tell you that this issue is way tougher than the motivation issue. The motivation issue is a snap when you make the suggested changes in my model. It is consistently like this. This issue is much harder. And the reason why it's much harder is there are a few reasons. One is this is related to what is most important in living, in society. And society hasn't prioritized our quality of life and our sense of well-being. And now remember, if our self-care is related to the wrong whys, well, we can't even deal with this other issue, because those other whys, the wrong whys, which turn trying to change our eating and exercise into a chore, we won't really have motivation to even get to this deeper core issue. But really, being physically active, getting enough sleep, changing our eating in ways that would be beneficial. On another level, these are all self-care behaviors. So when I started studying how do I help people change their mindset so that they can sustain these behaviors they start, it was very clear to me that if we did not address this underlying self-care level, it would just continue to sabotage a behavior, even one that you now newly excitedly want to do. So, we kind of have to ground ourselves to think, okay, so what's going on? And what's going on is, we're not valued in society for taking care of ourselves. We are valued for how we look. We are valued for how we perform, whether it's as a parent, as a professional, as a child. We are valued for the kudos we get, but we're not we don't get value for taking care of ourselves explicitly. Now, thankfully, I think the conversation, again, these are big ships to change directions. When you think about Arianna Huffington, she really contributed to this conversation with coming out about her own experience, what happened when she realized that she wasn't taking care of herself. Thrive Global, there are some big organizations that are role models in helping and supporting their employees and taking better care of themselves, because the reality is, and this is really the bridge to help people too, it's the business case for it, but it's also the psychological bridge for individuals. The reality is that when we take better care of ourselves, we are that much more. We have that much more. We do everything better when we have more energy, and we have more energy when we take care of ourselves. So it's a very, A plus B equals C, but we have to feel entitled to feel better. And some people come at this conversation. I don't know that I wrote about this in No Sweat. I certainly explained some people's reactions when we talked about self-care in this way. Michelle, I thought this program was about exercise. This is about my life. Yes, it is about. It is. And sometimes people cry because when they quiet themselves down and realize, gosh, I don't know that I feel entitled to feel this way, to take time out of my busy life to cultivate my own sense of well-being, it's a heavy topic. And that's those are the psychological issues, but then there's another pragmatic issue, and it speaks to what we already brought up. But again, if our self-care ask is too big, either when we initiate a plan, this is what I'm going to do, or just on any given day, if our expectations about successful self-care or the successful enactment of some health behavior is too grandiose, which I would say it often is, and fixed. We have very fixed definitions of what success looks like, then we won't do it either. So it's this multifaceted situation.
Right. I'll just say really quickly, for me, the word in this that stuck for me was permission. Because if you reframe it, we're talking about sort of transforming the way we think about exercise.
Yes.
If I think of it as, this is a way for me to be kind to myself, even if it's little, even if it's just like a 20-minute something, it is a way to be kind to myself. And then I can give myself permission. Okay, that email, that can wait.
Yes.
The world is not going to screech to a halt if I tell my family, hey, leave me alone for half an hour.
Yes.
But I think sometimes you almost feel guilty, like, oh, I should be there to take care of all this stuff. And it's like, I can give myself permission to do that. And
that's right.
It kind of frees me up a little bit, I think.
Absolutely. That's why in No Sweat, I explained my MAPS model. And that was an organic acronym that came from, studying this problem for years and figuring out, what do people need to solve it? Well, they need to give themselves permission. And that's the word. The P in MAPS is permission to prioritize their own self-care. But remember, it doesn't have to be a gold standard. And I think that really, it doesn't have to be a half an hour, right?
Right.
And I can't tell you how often that issue really gets in people's way, that they're like, I really want to exercise for a half an hour because that's what will make me feel the best. But we're constantly making trade-offs in life across all areas. Part of life is making trade-offs, right? But we haven't been taught how to make trade-offs when it comes to exercise and eating in more intentional ways. And I propose, as you know, in The Joy Choice, that learning how to make these trade-offs is essential, and it's not hard to do.
Yeah. Your book, The Joy Choice, focuses a lot on the challenges and the barriers and really dives into that in detail. There are two examples I want to talk about quickly. The first, I think you've been alluding to this all along, but I just want to unpack it a little bit more, is perfectionism, right? aiming for the ideal. And I'm going to just tell you a quick story that I read. A lot of times I read the New York Times and I click on these articles all the time that will say, experts weigh in on the best time of day to exercise, or you should be doing this type of cardio, not that type of this or that. You know, it gets really nuanced about like the ideal. I'm using air quotes here, right? The quote, ideal things you should be doing. And actually, it really bogs me down because sometimes, I don't know, just like some of the things I suggest are just not going to work for me.
Yes.
So could you talk a little bit about perfectionism and why? I think we've gotten into this a little bit, but just more explicitly, like, why does that become problematic?
Yes. So you're asking me to talk about what I call the top 4 decision traps. Here's another acronym: temptation, rebellion, accommodation, perfection. And perfection sets the stage for everything because, and it's not perfectionism, right? I'm not talking about a personality trait or needing things to be perfect all the time. I'm talking about I just want to make sure because I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. I think I actually said it wrong too. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Perfection. Yeah.
So we've learned to exercise and change our eating in perfect ways because those are how the role models do it. That's what the articles say. And here's how this all has evolved. It's not just to hook into our want to be as good as we can be. So if we follow what the successful people do, then we can be just like them. I mean, of course, that's what companies are trying to sell us all the time. That's what media articles are trying to sell us too. But here's how I view it. So that's one of the reasons why we have ideals and perfection ways of thinking about this. But the other reason is just this very organic way that our society has evolved to think about it. So if you go back to, for the last 40, 50 years of research on exercise, the value of exercise from a governmental funding point of view is for the physiological and health benefits that exercise potentially could bring human beings. And so millions and millions, we're probably way over $1 billion of research has been funded to study the potential physiological and health benefits of exercise. Okay. So in order to get your research funded, your research questions have to be pretty precise and also simple because you have to be able to convince people, oh, this is going to be worth doing. And I'll be able to measure it. Measurement is very important. So you measure something in physiology based on a dose of exercise. You might have 2 or 3 doses, and then you measure the physiology. And after the study is published and the media pick it up, it turns out that people who do this dose of exercise in a laboratory, we're not talking about sustainability. We are only interested in measuring the dose response of a certain type of exercise with a change in cellular function. That's what my husband does. So we hear about a dose and it's precise. And what does that translate into? There's a perfect way of doing it to get that. But it's only the story that got funded, got told because that was how the study had to be sold to do the research so it could be measurable and reportable. So whether we're talking about benefits from eating in certain ways or large epidemiologic studies, the results have to be told in measurable ways. And that in and of itself creates a perfection frame and a fixed frame about what something needs to look like to benefit you. And that gets back to this very fixed notion. And, I'm just going to jump to the alternative that we don't have to go there for the longer picture. But the solution for that is we have got, just like we live every other area of our life, we've got to learn how to be dynamic in the moment with our decision making around eating and exercise, because that is how we make decisions that are consistent, not the same, but that consistently favor our self-care through these behaviors. We have to learn to be dynamic and pivot and improvise.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're saying, as a sustainability, because that's what I think is so important about what you're doing. You're looking at this for a lifespan, not
That's right.
what's going to be the most effective thing to do this week, but what's going to keep it going. And so that flexibility is essential. Yeah. The other one I wanted to talk about the other example is rebellion, that rebellious teenager in us that if we're told we should do something that just responds like, you can't make me, and I'll tell you, my clients talk to me about this a lot. Like, I know I shouldn't eat that bag of cookies at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, I'm like, that's my way of breaking the rules. That's my way of having freedom. And so it's really, yeah.
I earned it. I deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, rebellion is kind of the emotional thing, right? Like perfection is more about standards. Rebellion is it's like feelings. And, on a theoretical level, we can look at reactance theory, which says that human beings are motivated to reclaim their freedom. Mm-hmm. So if a way of eating feels like it's taking away your freedom because of the meaning it has for you and the reason you're doing it, and these reasons and meanings are what we're rebelling against. And so that's why it's really pretty easy to flip that switch. So there are all these theories that would help us understand why. But if we just go into real life and we think about, being on a certain eating plan, or I'll use this passé word now, diet, being on a diet, and we're doing it because we think we should, even if we decided to do it, regardless of whether a clinician encourages us and very sincerely says, you are pre-diabetic, and if you keep putting on this 1.5 pounds every year, you are going to get diabetes. This well-meaning warning. Regardless, if it's just us, I don't like how I feel in my body. I really want to lose my weight. That can create this whole should chore meaning and why for the behavior. And all we want to do with those instances is rebel against it. We might follow it for a certain time, but the dynamics of that should eventually is going to make us rebel. And that's with eating. That's the directionality for eating. But if we think about exercise, if we should exercise in this way and we should do it this way and for this long, guess what? I don't want to do that. So the problem with doing anything out of a should paradigm, and there's many things that contribute to that paradigm, is that we can't fully own it. Mm-hmm. And that's also why the right whys, if we're making a decision to eat in a certain way or to move in a certain way because we know it's going to help us feel better than the alternative, that is ours, right? I mean, we still have to get past the other self-care entitlement issues and permission issues. But if we can say, this is why I'm doing it, and I will feel better and I'll be better as a professional and a parent, and that's ours. There's no should around that, right? And so that's why it's so critical to start out with the right whys.
Yeah. We'll link in our show notes for this episode to some motivational interviewing episodes that we've done, because I think there is something about someone telling you what to do in that kind of should type of way that, I mean, who really likes to be told what to do? No one. And so we've had some related episodes, but I think that this is really important to just be aware of that you're not setting yourself up for that, to have these standards that you're going to just automatically want to rebel against.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think that's really helpful. I do want to move into strategies, and there are so many in your books, and you walk through some really specific ones. I highly recommend people who want to learn more about this, check out your books. There are some super helpful practical strategies that I think will really help. But there's a couple I want to talk about. The first is about making exercise more reinforcing by making it more fun, right? Like you're talking about just needing it to be more enjoyable in the moment. And you had in No Sweat, you have an exercise where you list negative experiences that we have with exercise and things that are more positive and more fun. And so I made both lists for myself, and I realized there are some things that sometimes I feel like I should do that I just do not like. I just don't. Someone else might, but I really don't. And then I thought about, what do I actually enjoy? And that list was actually longer than I expected. But I just wanted to pause there to tell you that I found that really helpful.
Well, let me just say that people always ask, what's the best way to exercise, and the answer that any professional who cares about sustainability should say, and I think they are learning to say, is the very best exercise is the one you're going to want to do, or the one you're going to be able to want to do and can fit into your life consistently. And some people would say, well, I don't like any exercise or right? And so that's important to address. So I don't want to sound like something is going to be the same for everyone. Now, there are people so sometimes being in a larger body means that people have joint pain when they move their bodies. And so the challenge with that is to find things maybe like in the pool. Now that can be inconvenient. So this isn't a perfect world. Like right. I can't give the perfect exercise to everyone. So, but I do want to acknowledge that it can be challenging for some people. So joints, rheumatoid arthritis, those can all be challenging situations. They're not insurmountable, but it's important to acknowledge that it's not easy peasy for everyone. Some people have less sensitivity in their own body, interoceptive experiences. They might say, and I've worked with plenty of people who says, Michelle, I don't really feel better or feel anything when I, take that walk. But what they've learned to appreciate the positivity, the positive experience that they get when they don't notice any difference in their mind and body or sense of well-being is they feel proud of themselves. They know they're taking better care of themselves. So yes, they're not getting that, the type of body-mind related benefits that I think are the most motivating. But when you teach people to think about it in this way, they can reinforce it through these cognitions or meanings, if you will. So it's taking those more challenges aside, again, bell curve, most people can find ways of moving when they change the meaning of it. So let's just say you had always tried to run to lose weight and you hated it. It was something you should do and you didn't like exerting yourself. And then you were in a job and you never kept it up and you didn't exercise because you couldn't. If you couldn't exercise in the right way, why bother? But then you had this incredibly stressful job that you weren't in a position where you could leave it. And you found that running would help you blow off steam and reduce your stress. All of a sudden, running went from being this enemy to being an ally because it cultivated experiences in you that you needed, but you had to change the meaning of it. So I guess I want to ask you, when you kind of came up with this list of things that might have been more fun, if you were doing them with maybe the wrong why, or had you ever done them in the past with the wrong why where you didn't like them, but now you do because you changed the meaning of them?
Yeah. I think that some of the things that I do that I put on my positive list are I put Peloton on there because I wouldn't say that cycling is my favorite thing in the world, but it's kind of fun. But also I always feel it just helps with my stress. You know what I mean? And I don't do super hardcore or anything. Same thing with, I have a strength training thing that I sometimes do at home that's pretty, I can do it pretty quickly. But it's I think it's that association where it helps me with stress to me, that's the transformation.
Yes. Yes. It helps you with stress and then you feel better.
Yeah. And I will let me tell you my favorite thing that I discovered. So I had taken beginner ballet probably 5 years ago before COVID. And actually, I've talked about it on the podcast before. If anyone's been listening to the podcast for years, they might remember this. But the studio shut down during COVID. I put that on my list. I love it because it helps me with the boredom sometimes of exercise. They're not mentally stimulating, but I like to dance. And also I like that you're learning a technique, like a skill. And so I looked online at my ballet studio Broach Ballet now has a lot of online classes that you can do. They're pre-recorded. It's not that expensive, and I can do it from home. And so I, thanks to your books, signed up. And so now I can do some ballet classes and some, ballet warm-ups and that kind of thing. And I think it's so fun. And so it's really helps me reconnect with the joy part that it makes no sense for me to be doing ballet at this point in my life, except that I like it.
That is the very best sensical reason.
I'm not trying for the ballet anytime soon, to be a ballerina, but I just I think it's fun, in a way that like a bar exercise class isn't to me, because it just feels like boring exercise.
And, the thing, I think that your listeners might relate to, or just an analogy that I talk about sometimes, not all the time, but exercise, moving our bodies, is inherently embodied, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we all have different things that we like to do and don't like to do. And sex is an embodied process too. And can you imagine if we all had to go to take sex classes and learn how to do it right?
Yeah.
What that would do to everyone's sex drive.
Take away some of the
right
fun.
way to do it.
Right.
Right. So once you make the analogy with sex, and I have a friend, Lori Hollander, who's a sex therapist, and we have always shared this understanding that whether we're talking about sex or exercise, people have to give themselves permission to do it in the ways that are going to feel good to them. Otherwise, they're not going to want to do it.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to ask about one final strategy. And even though there are so many more in your books, I know that we're running low on time here. And that is this idea. Actually, I think this is the antidote to the perfect problem, right? And that is all movement counts. Tell me about that.
Well, when I published No Sweat, all movement officially didn't count. The powers that be were saying that it had to be at least 10 minutes to count. And I was worried that my book, that, the top, my colleagues who are the top exercise researchers all around the world were going to really not support my book, because I said everything counts back when it was published in 2015. And actually, it didn't count until 2018 because
you were ahead of the curve. Yeah.
Well, it was because it's important to understand why we don't think not everything counts. So again, it gets back to the prescriptive. You need this much. This is how we study the research, and this is what leads to it's this amount. Now, the thing that's also important for people to understand about these rules that we've learned about what has to count is that this 10-minute bout that was clarified in I think it was the 2017, maybe it was earlier than that guideline, maybe it was 2014, I don't know, is that I emailed the first author of that paper because I was combing it, because I had already been coaching people both as a exercise, professional and a health behavior change professional, that everything counts. And I'm like, there's no reference. You said that it's got to be 10 minutes in duration, but there's no reference for that. There's no data to support that comment. Can you help me understand why that's in the recommendation? And the gentleman said to me, well, we only had a way of measuring physical activity that was more than 10 minutes. So instead of saying that in the recommendation, they just said anything less than 10 minutes doesn't count.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's why we think that there's all these rules. Everything counts. Now the science supports it. In 2018, the United States came out with a new guideline that took out any criterion. The World Health Organization came out with a new guideline, removing, the 10 bout duration. I wanted to give people context, because I think context is really important. Everything counts because I'm going to give you a visual.
Okay.
If we're sitting here typing, during the day, or we're sitting here listening to people and talking, this is how much energy we expend. But if we stand up, and we walk over here, we are doing exponentially more movement. And we know the physiology of just contracting muscles is that you just contract the muscles. And the other thing we know is that the physiological benefits of moving our bodies quickly decline. And so what we want to do is be consistent. Again, it's not being the superstar, it's just being consistent. And so everything counts is a physiological truism for most people. And so with that, it frees us up to choose to move and take any opportunity to move that we can see and claim. And as you know, in No Sweat, I have this very big list of all these opportunities to move that once we don't see them because we've been taught to see them, but once we can recognize them, my favorite is the long cut, right? Instead of taking a shortcut, we engineer taking a longer way somewhere to build in an immediate 20 minutes of moving. Active waiting while your kids are playing sports. You can do a loop instead of sitting and working on your mobile phone all the time. So everything counts frees us to find and discover and enjoy the gifts of movement that really are everywhere in our life. But if we don't believe everything counts, then we will never take them.
Yeah, I love that. It's like just, if it's taking a little stretch or going for a quick walk with your dog or something like that, it's not this really huge strenuous workout, but it's movement and it matters. And some days that's all you have. And so that's wonderful, right? To kind of build in more of those where you can. Yeah.
It is a bridge to consistency.
Yes. Yes. Michelle, thank you so much. I feel like I could talk to you all day, but we're kind of running long on time here. So we're going to wind down. So where can people find out more about what you have to offer? Obviously, your 2 books are terrific. Highly recommend those. Where can people find out more online?
Sure. Well, I have a website and it's my name, michellesegar.com. There's quizzes for both the Joy Choice and No Sweat so that you can find out kind of where you sit on the different issues that we've been talking about today. And I want to also let your community know that I'm in the final process of creating a certification to help professionals help their clients and patients make these transformations in mindset, learn how to do it in very, in a full system. So it's like you learn how to do it like this, and it's easy. So if people are interested in that, they should just go to my website and through the contact form say, hey, Michelle, let me know when this is ready to go. I'd just like to learn more. It's not a commitment.
Great. Well, we'll link to all of these resources on our shows and notes for today. And Michelle, thank you so much. I really appreciate your work. And I really am so glad that you came on to talk to us about it today.
It was such a joy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.